The second bullet point says, are these gaps trainable in any sense of the word?
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Some people who were required to use the new system weren't happy about having to change their working arrangements. So there is a sort of a mindset, a sort of, a personal reaction to what am I being asked to do. So what that was referring to was if somebody's reluctant to take on the new knowledge, accept the new system, for example, then you can't just sort of train that into them. That's a much more focused piece of change management work rather than training. So, we can't win over hearts and minds through training, although, you can do a bit of it. But actually the change management piece more broadly is about doing that kind of thing.
Welcome to the Westminster tradition, where we are unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Robo-Debt Royal Commission. My name is Alison Lloyd-Wright, and joining me today on Kaurna Land is my fellow South Australian public servant, Caroline Crozabalo.
Hello, Alison.
And recovering public servant now of Good Government Advisory, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Alison.
So, in this mini-series, we've been exploring how the Post Office ended up believing with such fervour in its computer system that it prosecuted its own postmasters for theft. We've heard how the Horizon ICT system was always going to be a lemon because of the way it was purchased. And then we've heard how the Post Office Board used the wrong test of viability in accepting it because it was so focused on business metrics. And today we're going to hear about how Horizon goes from problem child to golden child in the Post Office. Caroline, take us away.
Cheers. Look, so today's story is going to be in two parts. The first part is going to be the process of forgetting that Horizon was unreliable, and we'll kind of see how an institution goes about forgetting something like that. And then the second part's around the removal of some safety nets that made post office operations more resilient to Horizon bugs in the name of efficiency. So the first part is actually pretty familiar from our previous conversations. We left the story in 2000 with Post Office being worn down over months during the acceptance process as ICL kept fixing things at the end of the pipe and they finally get their error rates below the acceptable rate. The Horizon system is then rolled out over 17,000 sites, and this just requires an enormous change management and training effort, both inside the Post Office and delivered by ICL. Look, this period is characterised by a shift in the fractious nature of the relationship between Post Office and ICL, from a focus on the technical issues to a focus on customer service and training. And it's fair to say that the rollout, as with many big change efforts, starts off very, very badly. From the get-go, the Horizon Help Desk is overwhelmed. They can't answer the questions. They don't understand the business processes.
Who's running the help desk, ICL or the Post Office?
Beautiful question. Starts off with ICL running the help desk.
So they know the system, but perhaps not post officing. So there's a bit of a thing there.
Absolutely. There's some really great...
Post officing being an actual technical thing, everybody.
It's a verb. It's a total verb. Look, there's this really great testimony from the guy who's in charge of the help desk who says, look, they're really good with like printer cartridges and blue screens and less good with the 1,001 products operated in Post Office. And I thought it was a good capture of the problem. So... Post Office recognised there's a problem there. ICL recognised there's a problem there. And this guy actually, he sounds very open to fixing it. He's really trying to make it work, So in the end, they actually end up setting up a second help desk, which is run by Post Office. So in great customer service experience, if you have an
help desk. Right.
Yeah. So if you have an IT issue, call the Horizon one. And if you have a business IT issue, call the Post Office.
And how do you know... Sorry.
Yes. Unclear how one knows these things. And you can imagine how well that was going out. But look, so help desk, terrible, really, really challenging. I guess one of the questions, though, is why on earth are they getting so many calls? And it's because there's like thousands of postmasters who are experiencing difficulty in everything, right? Like they can't find the button for this and they can't find the button for that. But relevant to our interests, the big problem is this thing called balancing. All right, I'm going to take you on a really boring conversation here, and you're just going to have to stick with me on this.
Okay.
This is the crucial activity where at the end of a trading period, which is like a week, the sub-postmaster compares what he has or what she has in stock and cash to what the system says. and then has to track through the system and all the transactions recorded in the system to work out where an error might be and like try to make the two things balance for you.
We used to have to do that at Woolies
Oh, excellent.
at the end of the shift in the early 90s.
And if there was a discrepancy, did they make you put your money in?
No.
Yeah, so that's interesting. That might be one of the key differences we're talking about.
You had to balance your till at the end of the
Yes,
shift.
I had to balance too at Toys R Us.
I mean, I do appreciate that the scale is different, but I understand the concept.
No, but it's not like genuinely this is the thing, right? But instead of balancing, so they're balancing the physical till as against this printout on a computer that says a thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's quite tricky for them. And at the end, if there's a discrepancy and they can't work out what it is, they're actually expected to just put money in the till because they must have made a mistake. And they must have given too much change to someone. They must have had a clerk who stole something or whatever, and the contract makes them responsible for them. Now, the discrepancy between what the system says and what is in the till is what postmasters end up being prosecuted about. Mm-hmm. So if they sign the thing and they haven't put money back in and they say it's right, then they're charged with false accounting. And if they don't sign the thing and they say there's money missing, they're audited and charged with theft. But all of this happens in the future. At the point of rollout in 2000, when thousands of people are experiencing this problem, they're staying up all night to balance. Post Office and ICL aren't stupid. They do know that this is a problem with like the introduction of Horizon and not a problem with postmasters. So they're not thick. But they look through the torrent of complaint information and they draw the conclusion that most of the problems are associated with insufficient training. And note that insufficient training is two things here. It's insufficient training as in we didn't teach you properly, but it's also code for the system is really, really pernickety and hard to use. And so if you don't do it in exactly this step and then that step and then that step, it won't work for you. So user error kind of implies that you're using it wrong. Actually, it's set up so it's really hard to use right. And that's quite an important thing.
I mean, it's quite quaint in and of itself that they had a phone number that you could call.
Isn't it?
I mean, you fast forward whatever it is later and the idea that you'd have a human that you'd talk to is kind of, unless you'd already gotten through unless you've gone through some accelerated
the phone directory.
Yeah. So I think it's important to put this in historical context though. Like this was computerizing everything. Like they did a survey of sub-postmasters and counter clerks and people who worked in the post office in 1999 that showed that 65% of them had used a computer before.
Wow.
And 83% of them were familiar with a keyboard.
Oh, my God.
So that's a really significant percentage who aren't even familiar with a keyboard, let alone anything else. And I think 1999, even when we talk about robo-debt, this is a long time ago. So if you had used the money you had saved and thought you'll buy yourself a retirement-ish job, and at the time you were in your mid-50s, like...
Yeah.
You were born around the Second World War. And so I don't think that's not an unreasonable depiction of a group of people. It's not ageist. I'm already at the age where I find young people eye-rolling as I use technology in a fashion that is apparently no longer the way we use it. So
That's true,
I just think
Danielle.
it's a practical kind of set of steps which says that the people they rolled this system out that was, so simple and so not, so intuitive, I suppose.
Assumed a level of digital literacy.
A huge level of digital literacy that wasn't there. And so the narrative then becomes that it's a training issue because they figure out that these people don't know how to use not the Horizon system but perhaps the infrastructure underneath it and a computer in a more general sense. But that then obscures everything else that's wrong with the system itself. So, and I think you still have, like these problems as technology moves really quickly still happen where
Absolutely.
there's an issue of baseline literacy and then there's an issue of the specifics of a program or a piece of tech or whatever else. But I think it's important to contextualise the time and how skilled and familiar and how they didn't have to, you made a joke in a previous episode, Alison, about the idea that it was a revolution, you'd have direct payments into bank accounts.
Yeah, exactly.
So they weren't applying for their 15 different things in their life a day using technology at the time. So it was very unfamiliar. It was pretty cutting edge, I suppose, you could say.
It was.
And it seems to me that it's about more than training though, right? There's train people up in the digital tools, but it's also a change management exercise.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the episode actually opens with a really brilliant quote from one of the trainers who talks about, she'd written a report about how things about the gaps in training. And one of the dot points in the report is, are these gaps trainable? Like, can you train people to want to use a computer to do the work that they had bought their retirement shop for, and now they're in this place where they can't do it? And so I think there was a really big understanding in Post Office that change management was going to be a big part of this. So what that leads to is you've got lots and lots of problems. Most of them go down to training in this kind of way. So people kind of don't look for system problems now. They're looking for training problems. And they have a change management culture that's all about rah, 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 everything's great. We really need to get people on board. So there's a brilliant minute that the general manager of the Post Office counter was provided with by the finance director, which really captures the vibe. Dee, would you mind doing the honours on reading this one out?
Absolutely. Post Office's commercial success will now depend heavily on Horizon. It will not have the funds for alternatives. Horizon must therefore be implemented in a way that ensures achievement of service and commercial goals for customers and clients. To be sure of this, the approach to developing the business vision will need to be adapted to become visibly Horizon-centric. People's enthusiasm for finding workarounds and alternative approaches will need to be firmly channelled into making Horizon deliver what is required.
I love that phrase, enthusiasm for finding workarounds, because it's so true. The minute you roll something out, people are like, yeah, perfect. Also, I've got a manual spreadsheet on the side that I'm just keeping a little track of.
Although in this case, like a manual spreadsheet on the side might have saved some people from prosecution.
Well, indeed. So that's exactly the point, right? So they've ended up in this place where they're like, oh no, we have to embrace this thing really fully.
Because we've bought it and we don't have any other choice.
No more money. The cupboard is bare. So this, I think, is the context. So how did they forget how crappy Horizon was? Well, partly because they kind of had to forget so that they could get on board with rolling it out.
And when you roll out new ICT, the people who have built it know it intimately and everyone else seems stupid.
Yes.
And so you have gaps these are bigger gaps, like there were bigger gaps in 99 than there are now. But there's always a gap even now between the person who built it and knows how to use it and just has a level of literacy that's well above most users. And so like user error is their default for what's wrong with the system.
Have you turned it off and on again?
Totally. Have you turned it off and on again, or just that idea that everyone's not good at change. And the thing is, something can be true and still be obscuring facts at the same time. So people don't like change. People don't like new ICT systems. There's a whole heap of things that are true, and people whose job it is to roll them out all the time and counter them all the time.
Yeah.
And their narrative is, oh, God, these guys don't know how to do it. That's why it's all busted.
Yes.
And that's what gets in the way of seeing whether the system is working or not.
Yeah, a real determination to put the locus at the individual user rather than search for systemic challenges.
Yeah.
But as a leader, I get it, right? The amount of times we've all implemented a change where at some point you just want to say, dudes, the train is leaving the station. You can get on the train or not, but it will be leaving. So, Caroline, this helps us understand how they forgot or, decided to move past how unreliable Horizon was. But you said there were also some safety belts that were removed. What's that about?
Look, so when Horizon was introduced, it computerised the counter end of post offices, so like the little shops, but it didn't actually change the back end. So immediately after the introduction of Horizon, they were essentially doing the same processes in the back end in Post Office Corporate as they had been doing before that. So, and that includes this kind of identification of discrepancy process. So it was terribly clunky and time consuming and involved like 150 FTE in a place called Chesterfield, which they all speak of in kind of mythical, magical terms. So
had lovely lounges.
It's true. I think, and they all got TVSP'd out in the end. So, like, there's probably a departure lounge joke to make there too. Look, so what would happen is before and after Horizon, postmasters would identify a discrepancy, as we've discussed, and then they'd either pop in their own money or they could put the amount into what was called a suspense account, and they had to ring someone up and get approval to do this. But the suspense account would essentially say, this bit of my balance I dispute and we need to solve this out, right? And At the same time, every week they would get their weekly balance statements, either the paper ledgers or in the end signed printouts from Horizon, and they would send them to our Chesterfield people or their Chesterfield loungers, who were literally receiving 17,500 pieces of paper a week.
Automated digital system.
That's exactly right. And so then they would manually reconcile what they had received with the post office's own records of what had been sent out. So, what cash had they sent out, what stock had they sent out. And then they might issue corrections, because often there were like discrepancies between those things. And so then the Chesterfield people would put in like an error notice, it was called, and they would change the balance, right?
So I, sub-postmaster, have been sent 10 slankets to my post office.
For the listeners, Alison forgot the word widget and made up the word slanket.
No, it's the blanket with arms.
Oh my god.
What do you call those things?
Terrifying.
Slankets.
Snooties? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'm not going to help you. I've got no idea what you're talking about.
You do know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Right, so I've been sent 10.
Yep.
Horizon says I sold 4,
Yep.
but actually there's only 4 on the shelf, so I must have sold 6, but
Yep.
I'm not showing cash for selling 6.
Yeah.
And then someone does all of this in paper to try and figure
Yep.
out how that all happened.
Yeah. Did we send you 10 slankets or did we only send you 8?
Well, now
actually?
someone needs to go and check
Yeah.
this piece of paper and this piece of paper and this piece of paper
All
to see.
of those things. Exactly right. So this process takes weeks, right? So there's a couple of consequences from this very intensive manual reconciliation process that's happening that are important to understanding kind of the way this whole story plays out. The first is everyone is habituated to things taking a long time to resolve. So in Nick Wallace's book about post office, you hear these endless examples of sub-postmasters who ring the help desk or their line manager about the discrepancies, and they're told, look, just accept it or maybe pop it into suspense, but often they're told just accept it and the transaction processing team will find if there's a mistake and hopefully a correction will show up in the post. So when you hear the stories of these sub-postmasters, they often seem quite passive. But I think like sort of rats with random electric shocks, it's just that they were habituated to this slightly, ad hoc and unpredictable process. So they just kind of wait for things to fix.
And that perhaps previously had fixed more often.
Yes,
That
exactly.
had it happen before, felt a bit nervous, and then after someone sat in Chesterfield and moved some paper around, they were like, oh, hang on, someone flipped some numbers around.
Yep.
All good to go now. Take it out of suspense. Have I got it right?
Exactly right. You have exactly got it right. And I hadn't thought about that, but of course you're right. Like previously when there's all this manual processing, obviously that also creates mistakes. I don't want to imply that the Chesterfield people were like the world's perfect people, but it did fix things up. So that's the first thing that sort of explains what happens going on next. The second thing is that this process means that there's a large amount of debt held by the post office at any one time, because anytime they put money into these suspense accounts, it's considered post office debt because it could actually be post office's liability, not the franchise's. But most of it's a timing issue. So there's like £2 million in the suspense account before Horizon, apparently. And they reckon like 90% of it is just a timing issue. It's just like they're waiting to kind of issue a correction and actually... So there's not much debt really. But that's a big number. It jumps to 10 million once they go to Horizon. But anyway, so the finance team feel that the length of time it's taking to kind of get rid of these processing issues and the fact that they can't see what the real debt is a problem. And so they feel an opportunity arising.
So shades of robo-debt. We've got a clunky, time-consuming, resource-intensive process of compliance, essentially. I think we can see where this is going.
Yeah.
Why wasn't the Chesterfield part... So did they do, when they did their business requirements or whatever we called them in 1999, did they look at the process of the back end or just the process at the front end? Because it's starting to remind me of all of those times when you go to digitise even a tiny process or a form and everyone desperately wants to stop doing it in paper and wants to do a form. And forms are easy and there's something, it's not hard and then you go to sign off on it and you're like, hang on, what is this form that we're digitising? Why are we asking them that? Where does that go? Okay, well, where does it go? Does it plug back into the thing? Does it? Oh, no, once we get it in a digital form, we're going to type it or paste it out into the... You end up in these kind of things where... And it can often just stop anything from happening, and sometimes it is good to just have a go at some things.
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as digitising, like, rubbish in, rubbish out. and all of that kind of thing. So it sounds like they had the customers, they thought they had the customer side sorted, but they hadn't digitised the back end.
Well, Danielle, we're exactly at the point where then they go to digitise the back end, but I think you're not going to like the outcome of this. You're not going to find it like an efficient and great...
Why don't any of these have happy endings?
That's true. So look, in 2003, so we're 3 years on from Horizon out, Post Office has bedded it down. But if you will recall from our earlier episode, Benefits Agency is about to take its business and pop money straight into people's bank accounts. This creates two big problems for the Post Office, which we knew were coming, but I guess like it always sharpens the mind when it's like next week. One, Post Office overall is now trading at a loss. It's making a loss. So there's a problem, right? Two, they lose their working capital float in each different office. Now that sounds stupid, but what would happen is every week or fortnight, post offices would get cash that was pension money that would sit in their tills, right?
Quite a lot of it, you would think.
Heaps of it. They were using it as their working capital.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But now that all that money has come out, they don't have enough cash as working capital. And so, I kid you not, the Post Office takes out a £350 million loan from DTI to form their working capital. Because it's a loan, they have to pay interest. And so suddenly they have a big incentive to think about their cash management because holding cash costs money. All of this debt that's sitting in the suspense account is suddenly costing them a lot of money because they're paying interest on it. So they've got both a drive for efficiency because they're starting to lose money in all of their accounts, and they've got this issue around cash management. And they set up an end-to-end review where they say, look, we did the front-facing part of it with customers. Now we need to do the back end per Danielle's excellent idea. And this goes on to be the Impact Initiative. Now...
So this is where they say, all you paper processors in Chesterfield...
It's your turn now.
Your turn now.
Changes are coming.
Exactly right. And so they say, we don't need so many of you. Why are we getting the postmasters to reconcile every week and getting you to reconcile every week? We're using the same
like
data.
Duplication.
Bing, bing, bing. So they're like, well, we'll just get rid of that. And so they get rid of most of the transaction processing function. They get rid of all of that double checking and the kind of processing of that. They don't get rid of the dispute function. They keep a few people to do the dispute function. But they do something that reduces the disputes quite a bit. So we've got a reversal of workload to the sub-postmaster. When they get rid of the Chesterfield, essentially they're saying you, sub-postmaster, are now solely responsible for understanding whether the books balance, right?
Yep.
That's a bit robo-debt. And then they do, in another echo of robo-debt, an onus of proof change where they make it really hard for the sub-postmasters to say, hey, there's a problem. Because one of the few post
Where's
office...
the call centre gone?
Oh, they're still like hanging up on people after an hour and like sending them off on the wrong direction. So they're still around. So what they do is they say, right, we're going to get rid of most of the ways in which you can put things into suspense. And we're going to make it really hard for you to put things into the suspense account. So all of the ways that you've just been parking your stuff in suspense accounts, we're getting rid of all that. What is interesting about this is that Post Office and ICL are doing this as a joint project. And ICL say, well, you shouldn't get rid of the suspense accounts because it's like just kind of a normal business processy thing. What you should do is you should automate that process to encourage the sub-postmaster to resolve it really quickly. So you should say to them, once it hits £250 that you've put into the expense process, you have to call up and kind of solve it yourself. You've got to call up the helpline and get a solution to it. The Post Office are like, absolutely not. And there's a great email from Post Office to ICL about this, and I'm going to ask you to do another read if you can, Dee, because it really, I think, captures the key dynamics underway in there.
On the suspense account issue, I'm afraid I share the same beliefs as mine and others ops reps. If there is no independent control and authorisation process for the use of suspense accounts, then postings will rapidly increase to unacceptable levels. Irrespective of our aspirations for a simplified process to support commercially minded agents, I believe that many of those are of a more historic mindset will exploit the facility, creating a large parcel of manual work for someone, NBSC or retail line, to agree to terms to reduce each individual posting.
So what he's saying here is there's both an efficiency interest that people are going to put more and more money into suspense and we're going to have to manually resolve this. But also you see a creeping view that there is no legitimate use for suspense accounts. And
that left unchecked, people will just rampantly put things in suspense accounts.
They will hide their theft in suspense accounts, which, like, the inquiry chair just continues to ask questions like, it doesn't seem very clever to hide your theft in
the spot where you're supposed to put
things that are under contention.
Things that are not quite right.
But let's have a little listen to Susan Harding, who was the lead Post Office Business Transformation Manager on this.
The language which you use in your witness statement and today is of hiding and covering up. Does that accurately reflect your core belief that that's what was going on?
I have to say, that, yes, many postmasters prior to Horizon had been prosecuted for falsely accounting, basically, either for saying the cash in stock was there, for hiding it in suspense. And I could tell you lots of cases that of somebody where the auditors, because the auditors only used to audit post officers maybe once every 3 years. And I can remember there was one, I think it was Harrow in the Hill, was quite infamous, where the auditors turned up at the door because that's what they did. And he said, I want to fetch the keys out of my car. And then he went. So that was it. But it was clear that, and I'm not disrespecting any of the people that have been jailed if Horizon was wrong, but there had been many people.
So you said if Horizon was wrong.
Yes, I'm not doubting it was wrong. I'm
right.
just
So we
saying
can we remove if from that sentence?
Yes. Okay. So, but people had been jailed for many years for false accounting because that's what they got jailed for.
So what we've got going on here is we've got two things. We've got the removal of one layer of checking in Chesterfield, which puts all the obligation on the sub-postmasters to identify problem, and we're making it harder to dispute problems by allowing people to put it in suspense, which reduces kind of post officers' workload and throws sub-postmasters on the mercy of the helpline to kind of work out their concerns. But what we're also seeing is signs, even in 2003, that there was a trenchant view in Post Office that now that the training issues with Horizon have been sorted, all the problems were to do with the perfidy of postmasters.
Excellent word.
Thank you.
So we've seen this before, right? The drive for efficiency leading to disproportionate impacts on the least powerful who have a particular story around them.
Yeah, like who can we tell a bad narrative about and therefore it's just fine to push all this bad stuff onto?
And where is there an existing discourse of kind of theft or fraud that we can exploit and say that everyone that's captured must therefore be...
Yeah, the guy on Harrow on the Hill running off with his car.
But also, they've now been at this for a while. Like they feel they've worked very hard on solutions and call centres that you can call and more training and more this and more that. And it's like, well, we've done everything we can.
Over to you.
So it's got to be a values problem that is like that. It's got that feeling of like the same people working on something for ages who are tired of it and bored of it and feel like they've done everything they can. So what it is now is kind of what it's got to be.
Yes.
We're not doing any more on this. We've done everything we can. I went and set up a second call centre. Then I went and got all these training people and you can't tell me that there's anything wrong with the system.
What more do you want from me?
Yep, you can't tell me there's anything else we can do here.
Yeah.
And so that leaves you with the must be them.
And
I'm not saying it's justifiable either, by the way.
No. I think that's right. But I think overlaid as well with fear, right? Like... must be them, and my business is about to go under and I have to make these cuts and these savings, and this is a way of doing it. And actually, like, if they would just do their work properly, I wouldn't even need to have all this checking function. So it's totally fine. I'm cutting my 150 FTE and da-da-da-da. So that there's a kind of interplay of fear and fed upness, I think, in this context.
And I think as well, I mean, obviously we've talked about the relationship with robo-debt, but the persistent reversal of onus from institutions who have time and resources and an obligation to ensure that things are correct to individual users of that institutional system to demonstrate that their experience of it is correct is Just such a shocking imbalance.
It's like institutional gaslighting, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like it really
is.
It's like quite, yeah. So that I think is the end of this part of the story. Before we finish up, can I just offer a few little disclaimers about this? Because, like, the thing about Post Office is it really is a boiling of the frog. Like, it happens over such a long time. You know, they started this procurement in 95. We're now in 2006 by the time they end the suspense accounts. You know, like, we're covering a big, long...
Yeah. Instead of, if you've been in that project that whole time,
Yeah.
I've done everything I can now.
Totally done with it. And of course, not many people have been in that project the whole time. So many people kind of cycled out there was a big cycle out in 2000, another big cycle out in about 2001. Like, you can kind of see the names change. So I've told this story in a kind of linear way, pulling out the threads that I think are interesting, but I do just want to acknowledge it's much messier than that in reality. But the thing that I kind of keep coming back to is to remember that none of the story we've told so far inevitably leads with 1,000 people being prosecuted falsely, right?
Indeed.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
Because, like, many of the decisions that we've discussed aren't necessarily optimal, but they are, like, defensible on their own.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like you accept a subpar ICT system because, you know, you actually can't
invested a
afford another
lot,
one.
You can't afford another one. It's not that bad. It'll be an improvement on nothing.
Exactly right. You push more work back on your franchise holders. Like, it's kind of crappy, but also, like, it is a business relationship, and, you know, like, you can do that in the context of a negotiation. Obviously, where it all falls down is that then they go on to criminally prosecute people and or use their unfair power differential to kind of shake people down to pay them back for that. But I think it's really important to recognise this isn't inevitable, and it could have been stopped at any point, right?
Yeah.
It could still be stopped now at this moment of the story. So a huge part of the story remains to be told. It's the prosecutions. It's the part where the organisation senior leadership learns about the prosecutions. There were many different things they could have done from 2006 to 2023. And that's mostly the story told by Mr. Bates and the Post Office and kind of the Nick Wallace books, etc. That part hasn't actually happened in the inquiry yet. So this, I think, is the end of our first part, like the origins of Post Office. But we will have to do another mini-series next year once they've finished all the hearings on the next part, so we can talk about those things like internal risk management and complaints management. But I did just want to say this isn't it. And also, I think let's not learn the wrong lessons from this.
A great note to finish on. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. Those of us in the employ of the state government speak in a strictly personal capacity, consistent with the Public Sector Code of Ethics that permits public servants to promote an outcome in relation to an issue of public interest, in this case, the betterment of the public service. Nothing we say should be taken as representing the views of the government or our employers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.